Nervous about the volatility of public markets? Looking to invest in Canadian real estate but not finding the right opportunities? Neighborhood Holdings may be an option. Nearly 10 years of consistent performance, Neighborhood aims to provide stable income while preserving invested capital, target net yield above 8%. At the heart of the strategy is Neighborhood's mortgage product portfolio of first position 100% residential mortgages across Canada with an average loan to value under 55%. Neighborhood partners with mortgage brokers and financial institutions to support quality borrowers in transition who may not currently qualify for traditional financing and have a temporary need for capital. Neighborhood's portfolio has no exposure to commercial, construction, or bare land properties, is geographically diversified across major urban and suburban centers in Canada. Check out the links in the description or visit neighborhoodholdings.com to view the offering memorandum for investors and advisors or to explore mortgage broker partnership opportunities. This is not advice. Please consult a professional advisor before investing a loonie in any of these investments. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this information discussed today is not intended to be or construed as investment advice. Please consult a professional advisor before putting a loonie in any of these financial markets.
The dirty secret is that no one's ever going to get paid back.
People have the shortest memories when it comes to investment.
We just got to get Keith into Bitcoin.
Hey, there's a bubble. Welcome back to the Loonie Hour, episode 216. As always, joined by the three amigos, Boomer over in Halifax, Rich Diaz in Montreal. Art Wall's coming together.
Art Wall is coming together. I had a good week this week. Well, mostly. I accidentally slashed the 73-year-old on the wrist and nearly broke his wrist in hockey. So that was very, very bad of me. He's a lovely chap. But so I had to apologize profusely. But other than that, nothing much is going on.
Part
right?
of the game. Should have speared him in the nuts too.
No, he's great. It's great. Love hockey. I got nothing else to
10 straight, baby.
I know the Avs are crushing it. They have one loss in regulation. They're gonna
jinx it.
No, they're playing the Habs this week, so we'll see.
Well, that's gonna be an easy match. Keith, what's going on with the Mooseheads?
I don't know, but who's the third line left winger for the Avalanche?
Oh, no one knows.
Wouldn't you like to know?
Yeah.
Come on, guys. Hey, guys, this is Thanksgiving week. Happy Thanksgiving to all of our American friends out there. And it's also a day where ice cap sort of works a little bit less than usual. So I've been doing that. I think I told you guys before when I was offshore, markets are always closed on U.S. Thanksgiving, so it's actually a fun day. You're at the office, but you're not really at the office. So today is one of those for me. Some football coming up, and of
You've
course,
been mentally checked out all week.
Yeah, for a while now. I think it's and it kind of shows. But anyway, yeah, that's what's happening for Ice Cap today.
Are you American?
No, I have lots of American friends. And European, and then there's Rich. Rich is a global citizen of the world.
That's right. One of my favorite traditions of American Thanksgiving is how they pardon the turkeys. I just find that absolutely hysterical.
What do you mean?
They pardon turkeys on the White House lawn. Presidents have been doing this for forever. It probably started in the 40s, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, they literally just pardon two turkeys, and those turkeys will not be butchered and eaten. These turkeys are just, yeah. That they name them. They name them, and they play the band, and and then they I don't know where they go. They go off and live on a turkey farm somewhere, but they're not eaten. It's like a thing. It's you've never heard of this? Anyways,
I have. But it's people think American Thanksgiving. They think about the crazy fights at the malls on Fridays and traffic and everything. But if you're in any of these small towns, it's quite nice. Mrs. Icecap and I, we were in Northern California a few years ago. Just happened to be there during American Thanksgiving. We didn't book it that way. It just worked out. A little small town is called Gualala or Walala. I forget how it's spelled or pronounced.
Say that again.
Gualala. It's about 2 or 3 hours north of the Bay Area, little beach town. And so very small town, but we were invited 3 different families in the morning. I'm just going to grab a coffee at the only place in town to buy anything. And 3 families immediately recognized I'm the only tourist in town that day. And all 3 were invited there for Thanksgiving dinner, and they even one family dropped off a plate, wrapped with tinfoil with
Wow.
food on it and everything.
How did they know you were the tourist? Socks and sandals or what?
Yeah, we kind of stood out. Anyway, so Steve, any tourist conversation? What do you have for your last announcement? Steve loves doing this every week.
Oh,
Yeah.
my last announcement. Yes. For those that are in Toronto, we are doing the Loonie Hour Investor Series. I personally will not be there, but Keith, Rich, and friend of the show, Ben Rabideau, will be there presenting on housing, credit trends, global macro, how to position your portfolio, etc. So I think we have a few tickets left. We're getting down to the nitty gritty, but yeah, there'll be a link in the show notes to an Eventbrite page where you can grab your ticket. And yeah, should be a good time.
Well done.
Here she was. Okay. So what's happening this week? Want to go through the ice cap experience? What happened with us during
Tell
the
us
week?
more. Rich went viral. For anyone that's not paying attention, that is not on Twitter. Rich went viral. Rich, I think that was like an old chart, was it not?
Well, Keith's going to tell us what's going
All right,
on.
Keith, you
and I've
walk
got
us
some
through the
commentary.
story here.
Okay, let me share we're going to call this the CBC experience. And so to set it up, the timeline might be a little bit off, but a couple of weeks ago, Rich did a very in-depth interview with The Telegraph, which is a major newspaper over in London. And the article was about Rich, basically productivity, how Canada wasn't doing as well as it should be relative to other countries in the G7. But the person writing the article also compared that to Britain, because Britain has a lot of similar challenges to what Canada has. So it's a really good article if you can find it. It's not 800 words. There's a lot there. A lot of people were interviewed and quoted in this interview. And Rich provided some data, which he shared many times before for everyone. By the way, Rich Diaz shares so much free charts and data and ideas that it's, he is, a real gem for everyone in the country here. But one of the charts he shared was the per capita GDP growth for Canada, the Brits, and the Americas. Actually, it was all for G7. That's what it was. And the Telegraph, being proper journalists as they are, they said, hey, this chart looks amazing, but we can't take your word for it. Can you please share us the data and the source? And if we can recreate this, then yeah, we will use it. So Rich, he gets excited with data and everything. He shared all the data.
It's true.
And of course,
I love charts.
but the data was perfect. So they recreated the chart. They took out the other countries but showed the US, Canada, and Britain. And what the chart shows, look at the sun coming in behind me. What the chart shows is that over the last number of years, Canadian GDP per capita has been flatlining at best. It's actually in decline. And the same thing with the Brits as well, whereas the Americans, continues to shoot higher. So this article, is very well read, of course, over in Europe. And then there's a gentleman on Twitter, I think he's based out of Germany, Michael Arroway, I believe his name is. Rich,
I can never pronounce his name. Please don't ask me to say his name.
Anyway, he's a pretty big following, but he plucked out that chart from the article and he shared it online, and he has a big following. And he said, what happened in Canada will be studied by many historians and economists as the prime example of self-destruction of an otherwise prosperous nation after blindly following left ideology. That's what it was. Michael Arroway is followed by a lot of people around the world, and one of those happens to be J.D. Vance, so the vice president in the U.S. He takes that tweet and retweets it, and he goes on to quote, basically saying, it's complicated, but no country, no nation has leaned more into diversity as our strength. We don't need a melting pot. We have a salad bowl, immigration, insanity than Canada. He said it has the highest foreign-born share population in the entire G7, and its living standards have stagnated. So because this was tweeted by J.D. Vance, it's picked up everywhere, which happened to be picked up. Now we're at the CBC, of course. They pick it up. And they don't go on to question J.D. Vance, nor do they go on to question Michael Arway, who tweeted his thoughts interpreting the chart. Instead, they focus on IceCap Asset Management, who was sourced in the chart, and specifically Richard Diaz. This gets sent out as an immediate, like, red alert news bulletin all across the country. We didn't even know it was coming out at that time. And of course, as soon as this comes out, we got a whole lot of fan mail coming in. And the gist of the fan mail, it was just three different kinds. The first one, a lot of people invited both Rich and I separately to fornicate ourselves. Steve, some of them had it written in caps, which really hurt my feelings. I guess that meant they were screaming it. There are other people that told me personally that I should not have the right to live in Halifax because it's such a nice city, that if I support Rich Diaz, I should leave town. So we had that one. Another guy outright threatened me, my family, my house, and my business. He was pretty aggressive with that one as well. And that was the gist of the experience that came out with the CBC. So we'll go into the article first, Rich, your thoughts. But for everyone who emailed us, we did not respond back to them. But just to let you know, I like a shag just as much as the next person, but I'm not going to fornicate myself. So you don't have to worry about that.
What?
No. And all the realtors in the city, I'm not moving, so don't call me. I'm not selling my house. And for the other guy who was quite aggressive towards me, if you want to get together for a little elbows up, I'm ready for that. If you want to bring some friends, I'm sure some Loonie Hour friends might come along.
Keith, I think you're almost skirting over the point, which is like, I only read the article after you guys had sent it to me. I didn't even realize it was happening. I just saw JD Vance had tweeted it, and I think the CBC article was like a hit piece. It was basically like they effectively, like, Rich, I'm assuming they didn't interview you.
Well, I mean, they did send. I mean, it was a fake interview. They asked us some questions and then would immediately release their articles. So they weren't interested in what we had to say.
But like I've done personally like a lot of media over the years, and so I kind of know, like, you can have an interview with the media for 10 minutes, and then they'll take a 10-second, 15-second soundbite, and then they'll clip that because the media wants to typically create their own narrative. So that's typically how they do, like, these news articles or even short video pieces. And so the way I read the article was they just made it look like you were, like, totally in support of JD Vance's comments, and you were like this right-wing conspiracy theorist that was like anti-immigration. And it wasn't, of course, at all how you feel or how you view immigration or population growth. But yeah, I mean, it was a total hit piece. I mean, just reading the article, I was like, oh man, this really makes you look like a piece of shit, truthfully.
I mean, the lucky thing is that I have like hundreds of hours on the Loonie Hour talking about immigration, productivity, living standards that have in fact stagnated. And I've repeatedly said that this was all true before Donald Trump became the president of the United States, only 10 months ago. And I think that obviously I was disappointed, but I mean, listen, I think my record is very, very clear. You cannot triple population growth. Right? To be crystal clear, population growth between 1980 and 2015 was 319,000 per year. And and the last 3 years, the rolling 3-year average is 971,000. Virtually all of that is via immigration, which the Bank of Canada has repeatedly said. And that has in part affected our productivity growth. And those are not my words. Those are the words of, Carolyn Rogers has alluded to the fact that the labor mix is an important contributor to our productivity decline or productivity emergency. Those are the words that she's used. Most recently, a couple of weeks ago on November 19th, there was another article written by Nicholas Vincent who talked about Canada's productivity emergency. And then the other thing that I think was really the best part of the whole thing was on May 9th, of 2025, the Bank of Canada wrote a piece literally called, I'm looking at it right now, I'm laughing because it's, I mean, it's like kind of almost, it's so on the nose that you couldn't even make it up. And the title of the piece that the Bank of Canada wrote is "The Shift in Canadian Immigration Composition and Its Effects on Wages." And it's a 42-page research paper, which I've read. And in that paper, they literally say, if, and I quote from the paper, "If newcomer conditional wages reflect their labor productivity, the productive capacity of Canadian economy grew less than it would have if recent newcomers had the same socioeconomic characteristics as in the past." And they go on to say, we can, I'm not going to bore you guys, but like, basically, just to turn it back over to you guys. They basically say that not only has Canada's experienced an unprecedented surge in immigration, but the composition of recent newcomers has been markedly different than in the past. For instance, the recent NPRs are younger, less experienced, and have seen their share in skilled occupations fall modestly. And I mean, that's on page 25, right, of the paper. You're welcome. You can just Google it. And so it is. So, I perhaps should have been, I wish CBC had been more nuanced in their criticism of me. But I think that the real point more generally is that the CBC, I think, just constantly obfuscates the fact that Canada is in a productivity emergency, to quote Carolyn Rogers, Senior Deputy Bank of Canada Governor, and that Canada is in a vicious circle, to quote Nicholas Vincent, because of this weaker productivity. And to quote the Bank of Canada again from May, part of that has to do with the changes in immigration policy. And the fact that a particular politician from one country, another country, despite the fact that we may or may not hate him, anyways, that's the thing. So there you go. Wrapping
Rich,
up.
I think the point to summarize is effectively Canada's immigration system over decades has been built on attracting highly skilled, highly educated immigrants that bring obviously, skill sets and productivity, et cetera. And of course, we deviated from that into these basically scam colleges, temporary foreign workers, and flooding basically with low skill. And so that was ultimately the issue. But I mean, I think this is kind of highlights the challenge today with media, right? And it's so sad to see that, like, because Canadians are just so infuriated with Donald Trump and that administration that, like, if you get branded alongside that, it's just immediate. Like, people can't even think for themselves. They didn't even ask any questions.
Well, what's interesting, Steve, like, that article, it was also picked up by at least 4 or 5 other news platforms in Canada, some big ones as well. None of them targeted Rich the way the CBC did. They didn't do it. And the CBC one is very specific. And it's disappointing. I mean, obviously they have their audience, and they were clearly triggered. So think about it, to email another human being, to threaten them. And of course, let everyone know, all these threatening emails, they all came from emails with no names on it. No one left me their real name or phone number. They're not that tough, really. But the disappointment with it, Steve, is that in my mind, if you're a real journalist, don't worry about the messenger. Look at that chart and say, hey, wait a second. I wasn't aware of this. This is interesting. I want to find out if it's accurate. I'm going to go find this Telegraph article and read it. And if the data is accurate, instead of trying to shoot it down or defend a different view, investigate it further. Hey, why is this happening? How do we that's what the article should be. Instead, they just, they have this TDS, level 10. And, I was sort of joking about it in the beginning, but there were a lot of very unkind people towards Rich this past week, and it was not tolerated. It shouldn't be tolerated.
Anyways, let's move on. I think ultimately why we do this show is, we believe we can provide a high level service, hopefully to educate some people or just at least spark a debate and a conversation. And I think, we've talked about Canada's housing crisis. We've talked about Canada's immigration problems over the last, Rich, 3, 4, 5 years since we started this show. And I mean, I think the track record on the Loonie Hour has been very, very good. I mean, we don't get everything right, but I think if you look at what the Carney government has done or announced since they've come in, I mean, his words were, "We are getting immigration under control." That was what, the wording that they used in the most recent budget, which is effectively they are reducing population growth to effectively zero over the next 2 years. And in my opinion, that is an admission of guilt, which is to say, listen, it got away on us. We are now going to try to fix this, and we are going to basically put a temporary pause on population growth and reducing the share of the population of temporary workers and foreign students, temporary residents effectively, down from, I think, 7% to 5% of the overall population. So in my opinion, I think that they're aware of the issue that was made. And so this is not controversial. The only thing controversial is not taking the time to actually understand the facts, which is really like most of this country. That will kind of, that will pivot, Rich, like I'm hearing all the conversations today and I'm just like, I'm mostly like, just in the weeds of like the comment sections. I just like to read people's like overall views and sentiment. And we're hearing a lot, of course, around this new pipeline. That's as of today, we're recording this on Thursday. The Carney government has officially announced, they come out, did a press conference with Danielle Smith of Alberta, announcing a memorandum of understanding around a new oil pipeline running from Alberta to BC. And just reading all of the commentary around pipelines, energy, environmental, man, there's a lot. I mean, there's always opposing views, which is important. I mean, that's what makes a democratic society, but a lot of it is just...
So have comments come out already? Because the presser is, I think it's like still ongoing.
Well, I mean, there's comments just in general because of leading up to the announcement, right? I think it was well known that this was going to be announced. I mean, we had we had Sean Speer, right?
Yep.
Who said that you'd get basically a pipeline announcement prior to the Grey Cup. He was,
on the Grey Cup, he was off by 2 whole weeks. The bum.
He's off. Yeah, what the hell, man? Never invite that guy back on.
He didn't cover the spread at all.
Yeah, I know he didn't cover the spread. That's exactly right.
But we got the pipeline. Seemingly, at least a memorandum of understanding. So, it's going to be really interesting to sort of see the debates. You're seeing politicians like David Eby come out and talk about, the First Nations don't want it. That's bullshit. The vast majority of First Nations want it. The vast majority of Canadians support it through all the polling. So we'll see.
The CBC are going to come after you for saying that, Steve. That is not accurate.
But yeah, so just to summarize it, like we're going to bring on some experts. We'll see if we can get a couple on next week to kind of walk us through all the ins and the outs of this memorandum of understanding, where the impediments could be, et cetera, but just sort of high level overview. So it looks like effectively the Carney government has come out and has really kind of rolled back most of the sins of the Trudeau government era. So they've announced the pipeline from Alberta to BC. Again, obviously a lot of work to be done there. We'll see if it actually gets built. But they've done carve-outs for Canada's clean energy regulations. And they've announced basically a condition of the pipeline is that they're going to have to advance the Pathways Alliance carbon capture project. So they're I guess, Rich, they're trying to position it as effectively a trade-off. Listen, you do this carbon capture project, will allow you to build a new oil pipeline, I guess, just save face kind of thing. But it's interesting, right? I mean, you're seeing, there's rumors now, there's a lot of disruption in the Liberal caucus. There's clearly some backbenchers that were around in the Trudeau era that are very ESG, environment focused, that don't agree with the dramatic shift in policy stance. But Rich, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I mean, the one that comes to mind is, when Nixon goes to China.
Yeah, that's a great one, actually. I think you're, I mean, let me just process that for a second. I think you're 100% right. It is when nation goes to China, only sort of a quote unquote center left or left wing government could do what I think the right in this country has been basically begging for many, many years. So I think you're 100% right on that. Listen, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think anybody who understands the current account balance, as I've demonstrated on this channel for many, many, many years now, on my own personal channel, understands the importance of of oil to all Canadians. I think we've still got a long way to play for. Ironically, I think that it's probably the best thing for the elbows up crowd. You know what I mean? Like 92% of our oil, 92% of our oil goes to the US, and a pipeline going from east to west actually helps sort of cut the US out of that oil market. So I think that's kind of fascinating in its own right. What I really, really hope is that this is private money, that eventually, with some clarity on the regulatory framework and from a legal framework, because I think that there's going to be some legal pushback from David Eby's of the world, et cetera. I really hope that it's a private sector that says, okay, fine, the path is clear and we want to commit our money, our private money, to build this thing. Because, that's the problem Canada has. It's private sector capex, or capital investment. And what we need to do is create an environment where foreign money and domestic private money is investing in Canada.
I mean, the first reaction you see, so this came out yesterday, by the way. And so today is the press conference, of course, but yesterday would have been Wednesday.
Well, yeah, I think it's been leaked. Sorry, just to interrupt. It's been leaked kind of throughout the week from the CBC, somehow got tipped off. It's been leaked by various media sources throughout the week. And now we have your official announcement today on Thursday morning here.
Yesterday, though, so like Richard talking about, hey, this has to, we've talked about this for a while now, that Canada needs to make the steps to attract foreign capital to come into the country for investment. And yesterday, I think it was around maybe 1 Eastern. I think that's when it officially, it's the official, unofficial announcement that it is happening. Canadian dollar appreciated about 45 basis, so about 0.5%, just like that. So that is the market telling you this is a good thing. So it goes along with what we've been saying now for a while. Canada, we make our competitive advantage, is the energy sector and the commodity world. And, this just shows it. So hopefully this will, obviously a memorandum of understanding, it just means, okay, we agree we need to go further with it. Nothing has been done yet, but it's the first step to get there. But currency markets immediately said, we like this. So it is a step in the right direction.
Just to interrupt, and where it gets interesting is this, the politics of it. Again, I think we all agree that we really dislike politics in general. This is just such a waste of time. But I think it's going to be interesting with David Eby here in BC, who's been very, very vocal against his displeasure around the idea even of a pipeline. And so ultimately the federal government has jurisdiction over this. So effectively the politics is he's going to try to appease BC and David Eby. But ultimately, if the federal government wants, they can effectively run this project through. So we'll see how that kind of plays out. But I think that's where things get really interesting. And speaking of another David Eby, he also took another loss this week. There was a huge announcement it was a Nutrien.
Yep.
So a Saskatchewan potash deal. I think it was $1 billion.
Yeah. They want to. I think that what they want to do is expand, So one of the problems with, as I understand it, again, I'm a little bit of a tourist on this. One of the problems, as I understand it, is that the BC port needs to be sufficiently upgraded to accept different types of crops and commodities and products and blah, blah, blah. And there's been, to David Eby's credit, his point about the fact that there has not been enough federal government money in order to do the sufficient upgrades necessary for British Columbia port haven't been there. And so there's been sort of some constraints. And so, but obviously it's been amplified and there's some acrimony around, natural gas and oil and blah, blah, blah. And so basically Saskatchewan said, screw it, we're going south and they're going to use the port in Washington State, which is the state that's furthest northwest. I mean, Alaska's, I guess, the furthest northwest, but you get my point. So we're going to Washington. And it's actually it's a lot of money. And so people are saying, why does potash matter? So Canada is one of the biggest producers of potash, just for people to understand. Potash is like critical for plant health. It's effectively a fertilizer, for lack of a better point. So what you need so really quickly, you need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And potash is like a key component for improving crop yields and quality, blah, blah, blah. It's sent all over the world. It's extremely high quality. It's shipped, it's created in Saskatchewan, and they're basically going to go south and then, left, I guess, or west to Washington State to basically ship it out to the rest of the world that's desperate for this product. And of course, the British Columbian government is obviously not very happy. And this goes back to what we talked about in April, which is all this elbows up stuff is bullshit. But it is fascinating. I mean, it's really, really kind of an important, interesting little tidbit as far as economic news in Canada.
We also had another one. We had an announcement, or I guess Canada is on the verge of announcing a landmark 10-year uranium supply agreement worth nearly $3 billion between Canada and India. So the deal will be involving Saskatchewan-based Cameco, the world's largest publicly traded uranium producer, will provide steady fuel for India's expanding nuclear fleet. So again, I think there's lots happening in the Canadian natural resource space, between the new pipeline memorandum of understanding. You got the potash, you got the uranium stuff going on. It's exciting. I mean, as to Keith's point, it's kind of like let's see. I mean, you can talk about it, you can announce it, but at the end of the day, you still have to execute. And I think that's where the discussion and the debate is going to lie over the next couple of years. Is let's see now if they can execute. But I think, at least for myself, Rich, I think just to see the dramatic shift in policy stance, we know it's the same government as the last 10 years, but clearly they seem to be taking a different approach to the previous administration.
Yeah, nothing focuses the mind like losing your job. I mean, it's great. You made the point before we got on, and I think it's worth repeating. You got to give the guy credit. There's obviously been a shift, and even us, we have to park our sour grapes a little bit and say, look, that's the keep it in the ground crowd is being clearly sidelined, and we all need it. This is the thing that people need to understand. Every Canadian, from Newfoundland to Nunavut to James Bay, all the way to even you guys and the Teslas in Vancouver, benefits from improving investment, exports, productivity, and all that. Keith demonstrated the currency. We can talk about lower interest rates. I mean, it's all higher GDP per capita, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is a good thing. It's unequivocal, really.
Well, it really comes back to the original start of the conversation, right? Which is like we highlighted GDP per capita over the last decade and how poorly Canada has performed. And so to see like this staunch reversal of slowing immigration, ramping up our natural resource sector, ramping up investment. So it's we're taking the correct steps. Again, I think it's all in the execution moving forward. But
you're not going to hear me say this often, but I think I'm actually kind of feel sorry for Mark Carney in a way, because the damage that's been done over the last 10 years, and let's make no mistake about it, when the Bank of Canada says it's a productivity emergency, she means it. Canada's 37th out of 38 countries when it comes to per capita GDP growth from 2015 to 2004. Even when you account for purchasing power, which is purchasing power parity, which is a very important little wrinkle. It's, I feel bad for Mark Carney because you could literally do every single thing, every right, quote unquote, right thing in the next, let's say 12 months. And it is still going to take years to, frankly, excuse my language, unfuck ourselves, basically, because you can't, that's the problem. When you look at CapEx per GDP, those are at 20-year lows. You look at manufacturing, those are really, really horrible. You look at something that a friend of the show, Stefan Marion, talks about, which is competitiveness the competitiveness index or indicators for manufacturing. This is outside of natural resources, but that's really, really, really poor. It's done really poorly. There's been way too many regulations in that space. And so, again, I feel sorry in a sense for the current crop of leaders, Mark Carney and co, because even if he does everything right, I still think it's going to take 2 years for it to improve. So we'll see. He may not get the credit. I don't know what's going to happen, but
okay. So
Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity is enormous in this space. I don't know if people are aware, but you have the Office of Strategic Capital down in the U.S. It's basically an arm that come off from the Pentagon, but they have about $200 billion that they are allocating specifically towards rare earths, critical minerals, and as well as covered technology like AI, stuff like that. But we are next door neighbors with these guys, and there's 200 billion, and that's going to be combined with private capital as well. So if we are able to turn on the dime here and say, hey, by the way, Americans, we are wide open. All these things that you want to do domestically to reduce your dependency upon China, we can do it with you, and we're now open for business. Then you're going to see Canadian dollar just go skyrocket. Like it will surge. So, it's great that we've done these little tic-tac-toes so far. Pipeline, the potash one, Nutrien, the Cameco with the uranium for India. That can be just the beginning. Again, we've said before, and Rich, you've done a lot of work on this in presentations as well. And you've always concluded that if Canada does turn here on a dime, the opportunity is amazing. It's enormous, but it is with our competitive advantage, which is in the energy and commodity sector.
Keith, it takes me back to like 2 of the interviews that we did with Doomberg. For those that haven't listened to it, the Green Chicken, one of the most popular Substack writers in the energy space. And I remember, I think it was the first interview we did with him maybe a couple of years ago when he's like, listen, like for all of the things that ail Canada, I am super, super, super bullish because of just all the abundance of natural resources that we have. And then the most recent one that we did with him was prior to the election, where he called a Carney victory, and he called a Mark Carney pivot, which is like ignore his book Values, which is effectively anti-fossil fuels, and just know that this guy is going to set sail with whatever direction the wind blows. I had my doubts, but so far that appears to be the direction that we're going. Again, we'll see in the execution, but those interviews for me have been super insightful because I think he's really, so far anyways, has nailed a lot of the things developing here in this country.
So we'll have to get him back on then. I mean, because he did nail it. It was perfect. So we'll get him coming on soon. I think, Steve, you mentioned we're going to try to get someone on next week to better talk about this.
I think there's like
announcement with
like
Alberta.
even like the tanker ban stuff. That's obviously, if you build a pipeline, you have to have that sort of lifted as well. So I think just getting somebody on to sort of discuss all the little pieces that are involved here, all the chips on the board that we need to see move to really make this happen. So we'll bring on some experts in that space in due course. But lots going on.
Just one more thing, just to bring in everything together, and like the whole productivity discussion, the investment discussion, the piece that Keith mentioned about the currency. One of the things that this Mr. Nicholas Vincent, who's now my second favorite person at the BOC, said was that and I quote, deep down, Canada's affordability problem is really a productivity problem. And I think that that's like so important because, it's ephemeral, right? Productivity is very difficult to calculate. There's all kinds of admitted flaws in that calculation. GDP per capita is a blunt tool to explain a very highly complex thing with a million moving parts, including immigration, etc. But that's ultimately why someone like me, who is a nerd, who reads all the papers that come out of the central bank every freaking week, the reason I really ultimately care about productivity is because it reduces inflationary pressures, which again impact the poorest people in the socioeconomic scale. And that's exactly what Nicholas Vincent goes on to say in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs. So anyways, that's why I'm really happy about the investment stuff. And Canada has a horrible record right now in investment, and hopefully it'll improve.
Well, Rich, just to sort of piggyback on that, like effectively the last 10 years in this country has been leave it all on the ground, ramp up immigration, and let housing rip. And that's like effectively what happened, right? It was like all your economic generation was just like rising house prices and construction, right? So, and just to sort of see things all sort of pivoting in the other direction. Like we just had a note out this week showing that in the GTA, when we've talked about this for a while, that the new construction sector is like literally on life support. So it was another record low for new home sales in the GTA for the month of October. And just to put this into context, there was 25 new condo sales in the entire city of Toronto last month. So a population 25. So a population with like effectively in the city core of Toronto, the population is roughly about 3 million people.
It's got to be more than that.
Well, no. So if you go to the GTA, it's the surrounding areas, the GTA is larger. But if you just look at the city of Toronto, which is what they calculated, 25 new condo sales in the entire city of Toronto. So that's about 3 million people. I mean,
are you calling a bottom?
Well, you just literally don't have a development sector today. The period. It's just like it's non-existent. I mean, 25 sales. That's insane.
That is insane.
So we've gone from like basically all-time record highs in 21, 22 to all-time record lows. So like the reversal here has been massive. And like I really can't understate I think how serious of a problem it is for that sector. And again, you're going to have to derive growth from somewhere because it ain't going to be housing. Not for the foreseeable future.
So you want to short Toronto GTA housing and go along Alberta housing at
Saskatchewan.
This point? And Saskatchewan, yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Saskatchewan still, to me, seems to be still performing well. I think like Alberta's starting to come off. Calgary's rolling over. The thing with Calgary rolling over is it's rolling over because it's much more free market there. There's obviously more land that you can develop too, where the private sector always rushes in to basically build when house prices start rising. And so then what we're seeing now is an overbuild in places like Calgary, and Edmonton's not far behind. But yeah, actually, it's interesting on that point. I don't know if you guys saw, but I've been discussing this online. Is the city of Calgary had a municipal election, and their new mayor has rolled back the upzoning. So basically, remember there was all this like hysteria over the last couple of years around, listen, the federal government's going to roll out this housing accelerator program. They're going to start cutting checks to municipalities that effectively deregulate, right? They're going to say, listen, you remove like your restrictive zoning, you upzone your zoning, and we'll cut you a check to essentially help you fund, your infrastructure upgrades. So you saw a lot of these governments in Vancouver, Burnaby, parts of Toronto. We saw Calgary. So you saw all these places basically sort of deregulate zoning. And I think now you're starting to see, as these projects come up, similar to the one across Keith Street there, that you have a lot of neighbors that are upset. And now you're seeing these zoning regulations actually get rolled back. And so the Calgary mayor came out and said, listen, we're going to roll it back. I just got voted in on this policy. I'm the new mayor, and we're putting it up for vote in March. And so the CMHC, who basically is responsible for cutting the checks, came out this week saying that they are now putting a pause on, I think it was about 120 million in committed funding for the city of Calgary. So they said, listen, we're putting this on pause until we see how you guys vote in March. Because the part of our agreement was you guys deregulated, so we gave you the money. Now you're pulling it back. We're taking it back.
How do you feel about this?
I don't know. It's tough, man. It's so tough. I think the thing that you're hearing today, and I think it's a valid argument, is that federal governments and even provincial governments have tried to force feed municipalities to change their zoning. But local municipalities, like in a democratic society, right? Like you vote for your mayor, you vote for your city councilors because you, and so it's like they're the ones that are ultimately in charge of zoning, and every city is different, right? I mean, every street's different, every town's different. There's should like these cities carefully plan a lot of their neighborhoods. And so to come in and say to have a different level of government come in and basically force feed you to say, well, no, you have to do this blanket sort of a change. Yeah, I get it. I can see why there's pushback. And I think even when I talk to like people in the development community that are obviously going to profit off of a lot of these zoning changes, a lot of them are like, yeah, listen, like this doesn't make sense. Like it was poorly planned, it was poorly implemented. We just tried to jam it through. And we jammed it through ultimately because we were dealing with 1 million people a year coming into the country, and we needed a quick solution. And the solution is basically just ram it through and figure it out later. And now I think now we're starting to figure out that, hey, there are consequences here. And yeah, I mean, as a local politician that has to appease your local base, if the majority of your local base doesn't like it, you're going to come under political pressure to try to reverse it. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Well, here is the NIMBY update in my neighborhood. There's no longer one.
Uh-oh.
There's now three of these projects now in my neighborhood. And but it's funny because I would argue here in Halifax, there is so much supply coming online in terms of apartment rentals or condos, whichever way they're going to be structured in the next 12 to 36 months. I mean, there are so many new buildings going up here. That new supply coming online together with the population growth story basically, being stopped in its tracks, that has solved the housing market down here. Prices are soft. Rents are getting softer down here. You are able to find something and so forth. So I agree with you, Steve. It's, people, they tend to take a blanket, policy view towards this. Yeah, of course, let them do up these things. This is me. I don't want my neighborhood to have these big, NIMBYs going up. However, usually this is not it doesn't happen all the time, but by the time government reacts to an extreme situation, the market is going to sort it out anyway. Mm-hmm. But they're never proactive with anything.
No, I agree.
Yeah, why did the population growth stop in its tracks?
Because everybody was bitching about it.
Yeah, they had to stop it. I mean, it was just insane where it was going. I read this morning that last year 500,000 Canadians left the ER without seeing a doctor.
Yikes.
So think about it. You go to the ER because you're sick, something happened, and you're there, like some people end up there for days. It's true. It's because you're on a priority
No,
list.
I'm just laughing because it's absurd. Sorry.
Yeah. So, you get when the demand for anything, goes vertical and supply can't move, of course, prices go up, or, the price of healthcare in Canada is not being able to get a doctor and so forth. So we'll see what happens in Calgary. I mean, it's a good example.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it's going to be interesting. I think I think they're going to ultimately, I mean, my hope is they'll find like a middle ground, right? Which is like, I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think it's just finding that balance. And I think that's the challenge of politics, and housing in general is so politicized. But I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just to Keith's point. I mean, the housing thing is kind of taking care of itself, which is to say, listen, rates went up significantly. That got rid of a lot of the speculation. You've curtailed population growth, so that slowed down demand. And let's be honest, we've built a lot of new supply over the last 3-4 years. So like we were in a housing boom, rates were cheap, there was a lot of demand, and developers, in my opinion, actually overbuilt, at least in the near term. I think structurally, I think you can argue that, it might be in another housing shortage 6, 7, 8 years from now. But I think in the near term.
But see, that's okay, because it should be a cyclical industry experience anyway. Yeah. If once the prices become attractive, the private sector will come in and start building. And I mean, right now, for example, 25 condos sold in the GTA.
Yeah. There's no demand.
I mean, that's crazy. That just tells you either demand is incredibly weak, or, well, demand is weak, of course,
Well,
but
I mean, there's
supply
like,
is enormous and so forth. This will
yeah,
get sorted out. But
supply,
you
the
have
supply and the
to let
resale side is huge.
you have to let a cyclical, experience happen.
Totally.
Whereas policymakers, and this is a lot of the Western world in general. So Europe, Canada, and the US, of course. And we have this linear view. Whatever happened last year will continue next year and the year after and so forth. But the cycles will always cleanse out bad investment. And that is where we're headed.
Rich, do you have any thoughts?
I was just curious. I mean, it was sort of going maybe a bit, maybe the wrong contribution, but just like the density thing I just find so fascinating, right? Because ultimately there are places that can use more density. I lived a little bit in Halifax, and you have the peninsula, and maybe not where Keith's super leafy neighborhood, but you have like downtown Halifax, and there's like single family homes downtown Halifax. And I think of Montreal. Montreal, you've got the plateau. If you've ever come to visit the plateau, you've got these 2 and 3 story walk-ups. They're very notorious in Canada. I actually probably have a picture of one in here somewhere. But you have these single family homes, so 5-6 bedroom homes that are just stacked up on top of one another. And so, and it creates actually an extremely lively and wonderful place to live. I mean, the Plateau is one of the more desirable neighborhoods in Canada because it's like that balance, as you said, Steve, where it's not the high rises of dog crate condos. It's not those single family homes with a yard necessarily, but they're still very big and still very nice, and you can live in them, etc.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is finding that mix, and I think it's just like understanding. Like the thing where like my final point to make is like the one where like again the BC government effectively mandated all these cities saying, hey, you have to allow like multiplexes on all these lots in all these municipalities. And like the one that stood out to me, I always had a good laugh, was West Vancouver. Okay, so if you're in West Vancouver, it's up on the hills in the North Shore there. Like those are all 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, $12 million homes. Okay.
Holy moly.
Like these, like you go there because you want to be left, you have a lot of money and you want to be left alone. Like there is
like Keith.
like
that is my kind of neighborhood. Just leave me alone.
Even if you could build multiplexes there, I can almost guarantee you there'd be very, very little demand in that marketplace because it's a market that was specifically designed to cater to the wealthy, and that's just what it is. And like to try to like, I don't know, to try to ram it through and change that, I think it's a waste of time. It's just like read the room. It's never going to happen. and the mayor basically came out and said, I don't care, sue us. So we ain't changing zoning. Because he knows who butters the bread, and it's a market that is specifically catered to high-end luxury single family houses for the wealthy. Period.
Yeah.
So maybe in my neighborhood, since people want me to move, I should sell my house to one of these NIMBY developers and get them to stack it up extra high. That will be the ultimate exit strategy.
Hey,
what else is going on, Steve? So we got through the housing and
as we get closer
sector.
to wrapping it up, I wanted to briefly chat on friend of the show, Mike Green. He wrote an interesting article this week that, similar to Rich's charts there, also went viral. So Mike Green wrote an article basically talking about the U.S. poverty line. And I think, when we talk about the U.S., I think you can also make similar arguments for here in Canada. Where basically he talks about the U.S. poverty line, and he went in and said, "Listen, well, how do they calculate the U.S. poverty line?" And Rich, I think what it was saying was effectively that it's 3 times your food budget. So three times your annual food budget is kind of where they deem like the poverty line. And this was set back, I think, in the 1960s or something. It's stuck in 1963. It was caused by taking the bare bones food budget, multiplying it by 3, because that's food was that's how much food was back then. Mm-hmm. But he basically goes on to argue that he feels, based on his calculations, the real survival line today for a family of 4 in the United States is actually 140,000. So it's not 31,000, which is the poverty line today in the United States, based on that metric, is 31,000. he argues the survival line today is 140,000. When you actually add up rent, mortgage, healthcare, childcare, transportation, taxes, and food in most major areas, a family of four needs roughly 140,000 just to tread water. No savings, no retirement, no emergencies. And the median household today earns about 80,000 in the United States.
I mean, that's a really interesting. My instinct is that's it's too high, but I'm
Yeah.
very, very sympathetic to his overall sort of thinking, and I think that's really where I think we should focus the conversation, which is effectively a totally arbitrary measure was invented 70 years ago, basically, or whatever. Yeah, like a long time ago. And seemingly none, very few of the policy decisions have changed as a function of that. And we need to sort of rework the way we understand cost of living and why people feel like we're in a cost of living crisis. I also think what's really important just to be careful is that that's obviously skewed very much towards like, New York City, it's probably 300,000. And then, if you live in, Mississippi, it's probably much, 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 much less than that. But I think that that's obviously why people who make $150,000 a year in Canada and live in Toronto, for example, often feel like they just cannot get by. And there's so much frustration. A couple of weeks ago, there was in the inflation data release, there was a survey. They published a survey about how many Canadian families feel like they're under financial stress. I think was the language they used. And in Canada, something like 27% of Canadian families feel like they're under financial stress. And I think that what you're talking about sort of relates to that. Even though inflation has sort of come down slowly and wages have been relatively strong, people are just, there's just too much pressure on them financially, and they cannot get ahead.
Well, I think this is the discussion really a lot in Canada, and obviously I know it's like predominantly focused in places like Vancouver and Toronto, but that's two of your largest major metros in the country. But like one of the things there's been a lot of I think TD's written about this, BMO's written about this. Like it's well known, which is to say, like to afford a home in Vancouver, or effectively to qualify for a home today, like if you're just getting on the housing ladder, like you need a household income of like north of like 200,000. That's just to qualify for the average home. That's not to say like to go buy a house in West Vancouver. It's to say to qualify for a home, this is what you need. But if you're making 200,000 in like Vancouver, Toronto, you're taxed as if you're like wealthy. Like you're taxed as the high income earner.
Yeah.
The government thinks that you're very wealthy, but you can't even get on the housing ladder. You're just scraping together a down payment to try to get on the housing ladder to qualify. So I think that's the challenge. And I think where Mike's piece, you can debate the number, but I think he's actually, I encourage people to go read it. I've tweeted it out, and maybe I'll put a thing in the show notes, but he's pulled in a lot of the numbers, modern numbers today, showing like, I think the average home in like suburbia, New Jersey, right? Which is like not like a high-end neighborhood, but just saying, listen, if you take the average rent in this neighborhood for like a 3-bedroom bungalow, and you start adding childcare, for example, daycare, you add up all these costs that you cannot really get out of, and the income really required to effectively get by or survive is arguably much, much higher than the official government stats.
I mean, the other thing I think this relates to is why inflation, and again, productivity, but why inflation is such a big deal, because you have what's known as bracket creep. So like, 50 years ago, let's say just for argument's sake, you had like tax brackets that were set 80 in the 1980s or 1990s, but then you've had 30 or 40% inflation, and, you've had wage growth. The problem is those brackets haven't moved in line with the inflation of the cost of living. So somebody, so does that make sense? So you have a situation where you're making $100,000 in 1980, then you probably, let's say you're making $250,000 in 1980. Yeah, maybe you should give 53% of your marginal tax, still too high, but you should give a big chunk of your marginal tax income in taxes. Whereas now the quote unquote average white collar worker is making, 6 figures, and they haven't adjusted up those tax brackets, meaning that an increasingly large proportion of people are now in the quote unquote high tax bracket. And that bracket creep is really screwing up, I think, a lot of the way that governments collect revenue, how people feel that they're either rich or poor. I think the fact that people can't seem to get ahead, I think genuinely impacts the ability for people, particularly women, to feel that they can have children, which is why our birth rates are collapsing. I mean, ultimately, in a world where you have a federal government tax rate at a 25-year high, there's just something that's not right there. I think that these things are all sort of related.
It's kind of interesting, with this conversation, people will look at it and say, what's the solution? The solution is people need to get paid more money. And that's not the solution. People won't not going to like it when I say this. The other side of it is things are just so expensive because of other policy errors that have taken place over time. But the belief that government can create new policies or change tax rates or tax brackets, whatever they want to do on certain things, that's going to fix this gap. It'll give people more income, but the prices of everything will not increase with it. That's not going to happen. It's impossible. The more that you give out more net income to people, the more demand increases, and a lot of things are inelastic supply. So those, which is housing primarily, prices are going to go up further. So this challenge, I would argue, it's always existed. Except now that we get Mike comes out with a real interesting view on it and everything, and it doesn't, like you said, Rich, it doesn't matter whether the number is this number or that number. This divide or gap is getting bigger, and yet the response from our governments is, well, let's borrow more money, but we'll call it investing. It doesn't matter as long as governments everywhere, including the Americans and all the European guys and what China is doing over there. All that contributes to prices continue to going higher. So I don't know what the solution is. The solution is there's going to be a write-off here in the debt world, of course. That is coming, by the way. But for people to hear this conversation and think, oh, wow, maybe there should be no taxes on the first $100,000 or something like that. It might work, but prices are going to go up even higher with that kind of policy.
I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that specific point, but I think we kind of agree on the overall issue, and the issue is productivity growth. You need to be able to extract more output for a given set of inputs. And to quote again, Mr. Vincent from the Bank of Canada, Canada's affordability. And when you say Canada, I think a lot of countries' affordability problem is really a productivity problem. And we've seen, so, Canada has the worst productivity growth in the G7, but loads of other countries have also had really, really sort of abysmal records. The UK is not much better. And I think that's ultimately what we're seeing across the place. Because Keith, I would argue that if you massively increase productivity overnight, let's just say for argument's sake, all these debt burdens become completely manageable. Let's just say
if you theoretic. I agree with you, but that's a theoretical, academic solution.
Fair. That's fair.
And if we haven't done it yet, how on earth are they all of a sudden going to do it?
Okay, that's
time?
Also fair.
and all, like, for example, Asia, what do they call it? The growth in Asia in the 90s specifically. The tiger miracle.
Oh, the tigers, yeah.
The Asian tiger miracle
right.
or something. Yeah, where the productivity went through the roof. It was amazing, but it was really a debt story. They took on so much debt and everyone started working. Globalization was happening at the same time. And then all of a sudden they get saturated with debt and the whole thing just falls apart. So Asia, the problem with Asia got resolved in the end by sort of pricking the debt bubble that they had. And China, oh, by the way, the Chinese came out with a great new accounting categorization today, or journal entry. They are no longer using non-performing loans. Rich, they've changed it, Steve.
I'm going to love this.
Did you hear this one?
No, you were going to say they separated the operating budget from the capital budget.
It's in the same kind of world, but Chinese banks, instead of now using non-performing loans, instead of continue to stack it on that category, which is not a great asset to have, because it's not even an asset. It's just an asset that doesn't pay you any money. So it's, you got to write it off eventually. The Chinese banks now have a a category called special loans for clearing overdue payments.
What? What is that?
Okay.
I don't understand.
Special loans. So if you have a non-performing loan, it's not paying, you got the last thing to do, you got to write it off, which is a charge against your equity and everything. Now they're just simply moving into yet another slot that they're calling again special loans for clearing overdue. Remember, it's an overdue payment, so it's a special loan. Anyway, maybe
payment.
maybe.
I mean, we're not supposed to understand. It's meant to be.
It's a lead balloon going over you, I think, or something like that. But the point is, it's the debt problem around the world, and you can't get back to most productivity that occurs in the world is due to either an amazing technology just took place, globalization, and then the leverage on top of it. That's what really starts to accelerate it. I'm just making the argument, hey, there's no more leverage to use. That game's already been used out. Maybe it is the AI. Maybe that's what happens. Maybe that can take place. That can help with it.
Is it fair to say that China, though, effectively with doing that is trying to ramp up credit growth, right? Which is to get the banks lending again?
No. What they're trying to do is disguise bad debt on the bank's balance sheets.
Yeah.
So the amount, if you look at the amount of debt in the Chinese banking system,
disguise it so they can lend more.
Well,
they don't want write-offs.
To lend. The banks can't lend. There's no one else. Like if they force, what's different with the Canadian, American, European economy, for example, is that borrowing starts from the bottom up. So Steve, you find a client, they want to buy a house, you find a bank or someone who's going to lend them money, and that goes up through the system and it happens. With the Chinese economy, it starts at the top. So the CCP, which stands for the Chinese
Communist Party.
Yeah. I mean, they have a it's a controlled market economy. They say we're going to grow at 12% this year. Therefore, each province or territory, you have to grow at this amount, and to do that, you have to lend out this much money. They go to their banks, say you have to lend out, $4 billion this year. Those territories, or I guess provinces, they are over there. They go to their big time, borrowers say, hey, you're going to borrow $200 million, and they say, we have nothing to do with it. We don't need the money. So they are going down that rabbit hole where banking assets are entirely inflated from what they should be relative. We'll come up with those numbers for next week as well. I'll have some better data for you. But the Chinese banking system, it's completely, it's worse than Europe in terms of fantasy land.
Oh, and sorry, one more thing just to contextualize it. So the country with the most debt in the world as a percentage of GDP is Hong Kong, which is effectively part of China at 400% debt to GDP. Then Japan, 380, and Singapore for 340 odd, and France, 322. Then Canada, woohoo, 313. Netherlands, 306, and China, which is number 6 or 7 or whatever. I can't count to 7.
The Netherlands is 3. Netherlands is 3x.
Wow. At 3x, and then China's at 292. That's according to the Bank of International Settlements Q1 2025.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of debt, and you have to just sorry, one more thing. You have to think of like the GDP per capita of Japan, e.g., the standard of living or wealth of Japan, France, Canada, and Netherlands is much higher in aggregate than China. So you have to imagine, so China has way more debt relative to their productive capacity, but their so-called quote-unquote standard of living, again, in aggregate, is much lower. Obviously, Shanghai is comparable with Paris, or maybe even above Paris, but there's obviously, hundreds of millions of people in China who don't have that same standard of living. So that's a really sort of interesting little thing. All right, we're wrapping up. You started it.
Yeah, I got a date coming up here very soon.
All right, well, it's a good place to wrap it up. As always, guys, we appreciate the support. If you got any sort of value, entertainment out of this, I'll be asked that you share this episode with at least one friend, family member. Leave us a review on Spotify, Apple, etc. And we'll see you next week.